Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Mark, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about a very serious and heavy subject that honestly has been racking my brain trying to figure out how to get into the actual topic itself, just because it is a very heavy one. But you have a story to tell, but I want you to introduce yourself first and let the audience know a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Mark Harris. I grew up in Northeast Georgia. Got a bachelor's degree in physics. Joined the Air Force. Then I flew airline or cargo, then airline. Ended up losing my career from government retaliation, which is part of this story, and was literally driven into poverty back in 2013. Clawed my way back, have a successful career now in aviation, although I'm still not allowed to fly airplanes because of criminal fraud by federal officials. But my story ultimately is about what happened when I just took basic efforts to protect my two sons who are now young adults. And from a man who was very transparent in retrospect, was being protected by the federal government. As an informant or some other capacity, it's impossible to know. But had my life dismantled, and at least 7 plots to frame me on false charges, smeared from coast to coast. Just all sorts of bizarre allegations made against me, and lost my career and lost everything. Just trying to protect my kids. So.
I think before we get into the story, I wanted to really ask you about, has this changed your view on the world, or has it changed your view on just how things run, or what happens if someone's in a position of power or well connected that they can get away with so much? I said it was a different question than probably what you're used to getting, but I mean, just hearing your story and then reading about your story, it was kind of like this is what we all kind of fear, is that there's going to be someone that we interact with in our life or come across in our life that literally can just do whatever they want with no ramifications. They can cheat the system. They can make your life a living hell, even though you're doing the honest thing.
Uh, you hit the nail on the head. I'm glad you asked that question because I haven't been asked that question. And that, in terms of my own, you know, personal trauma and day-to-day dealing with all this, that probably has the most profound effect on me is my view of the world, of our country, of the world, in general, of the, churches, the establishment, because I don't know how much of the book you read, but how I was manipulated, threatened, bribed, with one church after another. Um, just the very fact that the system at every level could be that corrupted, that many agencies and individuals can just lie, falsify reports, commit crimes with immunity, because it wasn't just about this one man. It's about, what happened, the as one hand dirtied another, one hand covered another, all the way to the halls of power in Washington, D.C. And that there is, for somebody like me who's not wealthy, there's no recourse. I ended up being completely stripped of my constitutional rights as an American. My rights to due process, my rights against illegal search and seizure, against false arrest, all these things. And I had no recourse because I didn't have the money to hire an army of law firms, and all the agencies that were I was, supposed to be able to appeal to remedy these things, like, the Department of Health and Human Services, who said this doctor, he's not bound by HIPAA laws. The ATF and FBI saying, this federal convict, it's okay if he has guns, and on and on and on. And there's nowhere to turn, and so you reach out to the press, and the press won't cover it. I mean, the latest development in this is, one of these characters who targeted my career, the human resources manager for my airline. Turns out he's another serial child rapist. He's being held without bond in Georgia right now, and he conspired with another child rapist to target my career. You'd think a big shot at Delta Airlines, who was raping and torturing foster kids and exploiting them in child pornography, somebody would want to report that story. It seems like a big story, but they won't report it. There's a little blurb and a blotter in the local newspaper, how I found out about it, and I did my research. But I've reached out to Atlanta Journal-Constitution and other papers. They won't report the story. You know, Powerful people get protected even by the press. So,
Now, I want you to get into your story. I want you to explain it a little bit. But did this all happen like with your ex-wife and everything? Did this like how did this all come about? When did you find out what was going on? When did you start seeing signs? When did you decide to go for help and realize that there were some issues going on or something wasn't being heard properly?
well, I mean, in terms of seeing signs, I don't want to spend too much time on my marriage, but uh, the marriage was a disaster from day one. She had at least a dozen affairs. She had symptoms of severe childhood trauma and was acting out accordingly. And I tried to get her help, and she kept rejecting it. But anyway, so we ended up separating, and then she moved in with her parents, and my kids started. We shared custody. I was, commuting to work, flying for the airline, so she would have the kids when I was working. I would have the kids when I was at home. The kids started showing signs of abuse right away, and ended up not long after disclosing being sexually abused, and that's what got the ball rolling. Is after their therapist made 2 reports, I made a report, the school principal made a report. They were all made to go away, uninvestigated. I made a report directly to the sheriff's department, which was funneled to this creep, son of a mobster hitman, Joey Forgione, who made the report go away. Forgione was running around like a Keystone Cop, cleaning up after my ex-father-in-law, and cases of sexual abuse, firearms, and murder. So anyway, I ended up filing a restraining order. When I filed a restraining order, this guy surrenders an arsenal of guns and ammo to the sheriff's department. He's a felon, so that's a ticking time bomb in the background. He is blatantly, repeatedly violating the restraining order, kidnapping the kids. A cop who I've never met before, who wasn't there, falsified a report claiming he was there when my kids were kidnapped. Never met. I was there, and 2 other cops were there. So that was kind of the pattern. Is you know, cops in 3 jurisdictions in Florida falsifying reports. So I get hit up with these extortion demands. Drop the allegations, drop the restraining order. You can see your kids again. I refuse to comply. So they ended up filing a restraining order against me, but my ex-wife filed a restraining order, but she was following explicit instructions from the staff of the Emerald Coast Child Advocacy Center. They're the ones who put her up to it. They said, hide the kids, file a false restraining order, and then tried to frame me for false reporting through 3 separate avenues in response to a report that was actually made by my kid's therapist. And that was a pattern over and over again. Attribute any report made, regardless of who made it, to me, try to frame me for false reporting and label me crazy. And before it was all said and done, there were at least 18 reports, medical doctors, psychologists, school principal, law enforcement officer, and all basically made to disappear in an elaborate shell game with no.
When did your kids disclose this to you? And were the principal and therapist aware when you found out? Like, did you go to someone else to try and see if they or ask them if they told anybody else, just to see if you can get because that has to be so just you have to be so taken back when someone lets you know
Well,
that
I'd
because
already
your own
been
kids.
threatened by the Child Advocacy Center not to report abuse, so I was very cautious. And I talked to the school principal. She recommended a therapist. Took the kids to the therapist. Therapist says yes. They were sexually abused. You have to report it, or I'll report it. So that was the first report. So that's how that
Did you
transpired.
let the therapist know that the Child Advocacy Center told you not to report it?
No, not that time.
I was like, then who do you go to? I mean, if you can't go to the police because the police are the bad guys as well too in this story, or certain ones, you're like on a mission by yourself.
Exactly. And the whole thing was that way. So the police armed him as a felon. They gave him his guns back and then lied to try to cover it up. Testimony from his son-in-law that The Niceville Police Department helped dispose of some of this man's arsenal of weapons. My son testified, both of my sons testified in witnessing their father commit murder, and that they took the body out in the woods and hung it from a tree and burned it. It was bizarre occult type lynching. But one of my sons testified that a quote unquote bad guy dressed up like a police officer was there. So everywhere you turn, there is the police covering for him, targeting me. And that happened in 3 counties in Florida.
Did you look up this guy's background?
I did.
It's your
That's
ex's it's your father-in-law, your
Yeah,
ex-father-in-law.
ex-father. Yeah, and that's where things got really weird. It turns out he's a federal convict. He was involved in this white supremacist neo-Confederate group in Alabama. Um, uh, he was arrested in 1986. So while he's awaiting trial, he was a leader. He was an organizer tied to the Ku Klux Klan, Posse Comitatus, all these tangled web of hate groups. While he's awaiting trial, he obtains a permit to build this house in Niceville, Florida. Simultaneous to that, he enters into corporations with these other Church of Christ leaders. All right. So, and what this is all ended up being about was the house, what was there, what it represented. The house was built on property owned by a man named Charles Walter Ruckle II, a crazy billionaire whose family founded Niceville, Florida, founded Eglin Air Force Base, and he was a big shot in the John Birch Society. Okay, so Nobles obtains the permit. My ex-father-in-law obtains the permit. The builder is this Freemason Knight Templar leader. Okay, the house is numbered 1118 for the year the Knights Templar were founded. The same year, he enters into these corporations with names like Androgynous, Androgyny, Androgynal, Alchemy, Tabula Rasa, Panoply, which is a knight's helmet, Augury, Prescience, all this Solamic witchcraft, Knight Templar, voodoo crap. It's what they named their corporations after. And the reason all that's important because my kids emerged from this nightmare after being kidnapped and being held hostage for 3 months. And my son is describing what ultimately was this Knight Templar temple underground there at this house. Excuse me. An arsenal of weapons and ammo, bars of gold, bundles of cash, a drug lab, and all this stuff that I didn't know what it was. And like he was telling me yesterday, he didn't know what this stuff was. He didn't know who Anubis was, but he was drawing pictures of, this occult altar, pyramids, statues of Anubis, swords with, a skull engraved on the handle. All this, what one preacher years later told me, this redneck preacher in Georgia, was quote unquote Knight Templar stuff. Backwoods, Alabama, Freemason, Ku Klux Klan, voodoo is what I call it. So if you look at the order of events, it's really impossible that what my son said he witnessed was not true, because if you look at what he described, and spell books and so forth. Turns out my ex-father-in-law's brother, he's all over the internet with his witchcraft. If you look at his Goodreads list, it's all these books about witchcraft, spell books, Aleister Crowley, and the guy makes magic wands. My kids were raped with magic wands, and they talked about Papa's evil twin. He has a brother that looks just like him. Guess what? He makes magic wands and sells them on the internet, and he's a practicing witch.
I'm gonna start Googling people before I meet them. I can tell you that much. That's insane. I couldn't even imagine what was going through your head when you found that out.
Yeah, and it was like, over a decade later after my kids had described all this, I'm like, whoa, well, how do you explain this away? So my kids say they're raped with magic wands. Oh, guess what? Their uncle makes magic wands and sells them on the internet. He's a practicing witch and a follower of Aleister Crowley, who, guess what? One of the things in the equinox, one of their rituals is raping kids with magic wands. The So and and there were other related cases I found. One in Walton County, uh, tied to again Church of Christ leaders, Freemasons, a top Pentagon official, and those and foster kids. My ex-father was a foster parent. Uh, Married in an arranged marriage to a minor, deacon in charge of children's program, Christian school board president, youth group chaperone, foster parent, all these avenues to access children, which is typical. And, among the many other government lies, the state of Florida twice in writing has claimed there's no record he was ever a foster parent. So, but I've got proof that he was. I've got proof that he was a felon, proof that he owned guns, and I believe more than ample proof that, that he's a sexual offender. But nobody will investigate. So.
When you first got the restraining order put on you, did you feel like that there was a bias just because in a lot of these certain cases or scenarios and splits that typically go with the female a lot of times?
I think that bias was exploited. Yes, yes. Um, you know, uh, she said that I was stalking her, and she feared for her life and for her safety. Now, the evidence that she produced that I was stalking her was her father said I was stalking. That was it. And she's repeatedly admitted that, she didn't believe I was stalking her, that she had no evidence that her father said I was stalking her. And that I was erratic and unstable because I believe my kids have been sexually abused. So that was the evidence against me. It ended up getting dropped in court, but 3 months later, after stalls and delayed tactics, and by then my kids were severely traumatized.
What were you able to do when you found out like the case or the report that you had kind of disappeared and there was starting to be shenanigans going on with law enforcement and other things? Like when did you decide that you had to take it? Like nobody's going to help you. You have to go up higher up, whether it's take it to court.
Well, I guess it was after the firearms case. I found out. Uh, my own attorney, the judge in the case, the opposing attorney, the Florida Department of Children and Families, the Niceville Police Department, the local FBI office, and the Sheriff's Department all conspired to arm a felon behind my back, tried to cover it up. They all lied about it. When I found out about that, I tried to get the FBI to help. They lied to me. I tried to get the ATF to help. They lied to me. So that's, I was beginning to realize that something is horribly, horribly wrong here. So when the ATF and the FBI are lying to you.
What were you able to like who was able to defend you in court? Were you able to find someone that wasn't connected or didn't have any type of way of
Uh, so they placed me under false arrest in 2010. My parents borrowed money, sold property, helped me get a lawyer. Um, in the restraining order against me, I was set up with this crooked lawyer by George Bush's former attorney, Ed Fleming. She ended up getting cold feet or threatened, I don't know but she ended up dropping me like a hot potato, hung me out to dry, and ended up having to defend myself. So in about 20 or so court cases, other than the one time where I had that attorney hired by my parents, I was representing myself because I couldn't afford an attorney. So all the other cases, I was representing myself.
Now, do you think that she dropped the case just because someone had reached out to her that was a part of your ex's family?
I don't think it's a family. I mean, there were big time political players involved here. This I call him the accountant. This lawyer that set up these corporations for my ex-father-in-law and his partners. This guy, in South Florida, he had ties to international weapons traffickers, mobsters, politicians, multiple business partners who had direct ties to the White House, and people involved in multi-billion-dollar HUD projects where they were, getting favoritism from the White House and so forth. A bunch of cockroaches with their hands in the government cookie jar. But so there was a lot of power behind the scenes. But again, you know,
I don't know how you maintain such focus on it all. I would have lost hope when I realized that all these people were just like, there's nothing you could do. It's like shouting in a hallway.
it was, and you know, and it affected my mental health. I have PTSD over it, but and it goes back this site where this lynching occurred in Walton County. Um, it turns out it precisely corresponds to the description of a site tied to the Crestview, Florida Masonic Lodge where they own property for outdoor rituals. Uh, this goes back to decades. Uh, I found this interesting document here the other day. It's a declassified CIA document. Um, Bob Hekun Sykes, a foul segregationist congressman who was the one who got the funding for Eglin Air Force Base and other bases in Florida. He was a member of the Crestview Masonic Lodge, former OSS. That's predecessor of the CIA. Attached to Psychological Warfare Department, and 33rd degree Mason, Knights Templar. And you find this everywhere. My career got sabotaged. So we have this HR representative who turns out to be another child rapist, forcing me to go to this, what he says, the company doctor for an evaluation after my ex-father-in-law makes a complaint to the airline. And all this is in the middle of me trying to get this murder investigated. So it turns out Jim Brimberry, the HR representative, he's from a family of high-profile Freemasons and Shriners. The company doctor they sent me to was not the company doctor at all. He was another right-wing extremist with John Birch Society literature in his lobby and Masonic crap all over his office wall, and a member of the Roswell, Georgia Masonic Lodge, an ex-Navy veteran. He ends up lawyering up later with a guy named Clifford Hardwick, who engages in a smear intimidation campaign against me. Clifford Hardwick, an Army veteran, a member of the Roswell Masonic Lodge. I lost my medical certification as a pilot when a woman in Oklahoma City planted a fake DUI in my records. Well, it turns out she has delusions of seeing angels and come descend down from heaven and take her father-in-law to heaven when he died. Her father-in-law was another 32 degree Freemason military veteran. And she made those comments in an obituary of another relative who was a member of the Order of the Eastern Star and Rainbow Girls. And then you have Dr. Michael Berry behind the curtain in Washington, D.C., sabotaging my career. He was the author of the Berry Scheme, as published in the Washington Examiner, a scheme used to deprive pilots of their medical certification in whistleblower retaliation. Well, Dr. Berry was the former head of the medical director for the Johnson Space Center. His father was a vile racist, the doctor who chose the Apollo astronauts, who were all white male Freemasons. So, I never would have believed that this crazy cult would have that much power. I thought all that was conspiracy theories and so forth. When you have this many people targeting you, I had some guy named Charles Rogers just 3 years ago reach out to me. Was going to offer me all this help to get my story out and everything. He ended up hacking my Facebook account. And it turns out he's another Shriner and Freemason from Georgia. These creeps have come out of the woodwork everywhere I go, threatening me, offering me carrot and stick, and so forth. So it is what it is.
I'm getting like a whiff of Scientology here. Like that's what I'm feeling right now. Like how if you mess with like one little thing in Scientology, it's like you're affecting everything. You just kind of. Yeah. I've had like anti-Scientology people on the show before, and the amount of comments I've gotten from just Scientologists and just things with like flagging videos and stuff like that, just for talking about it. That kind of seems like what you stepped in with the whole Freemasons aspect of things.
It is, and I want to emphasize that it's that was the the main common link throughout this. But then you have multiple other tentacles to the mob, to the John Birch Society, to the Ku Klux Klan, and to the military. And one thing I didn't mention, obviously I can't prove this aspect, but this X marks the spot site, numbered 1118 for the year that Knights Templar were founded and all that. Um, you know, uh, they had this gun on display in a glass display case that my ex-father-in-law told my son was a hero's gun and the gun that killed the president being John F. Kennedy. Um, there's a lot of reasons to believe that could be incredibly true, and the biggest reason is the hundreds of government lies and dozens and dozens of crimes committed by government officials to cover all this up. Whose gun was that? Who was the shooter? I don't know. But you have an intersection here of all the usual suspects in the Kennedy assassination. Right-wing extremists, the military, CIA, George Bush, the mob, and then you have what I believe could be the missing piece of the puzzle: Southern Freemasons, followers of Confederate General Albert Pike and morals and dogma and all that, nonsense, who are basically, their history overlaps that of the Ku Klux Klan. I believe they're all right-wing extremists. They're all racist. They're all white, all male lodges and so forth. So it makes perfect sense. So.
I will say something that gets glossed over in the assassination, but Harold Bird, who owned the Texas School Book Depository, is one of these big Texas oil figures. He was hunting at the time when Kennedy was assassinated with a Nazi out in Africa. He wrote a book on it and everything. He was friends with LBJ. LBJ moved some tax bills to make sure that it benefited Harold Bird because he was a rich Texas oil billionaire. But he had the sixth floor window removed from the book depository building and replaced, and then displayed the original sixth floor building window in his house, and he would show it off at parties. So again, like what you're saying about that, that's another thing. That's just something that they do. People in these high positions of power. It's like I mean, it's weird. Like it's cool if you got an autograph and you're like, hey, look, I got the autograph for JFK hanging in my house. But this guy was like, I got the window that was used allegedly for the whole thing, which is just like, why would you be showing that off at parties? But again, that's how these upper class elite type people think.
Trophies, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've done the research, I don't remember all the names. I've got them all written down. I'm not a bona fide JFK researcher, but, the Dallas County Sheriff, the Dallas City Police Chief, what was I can't remember his name, the officer who arrested Lee Harvey Oswald at the theater.
Oh, Norm Macdonald.
I think so, yeah.
There's like 4 or 5 of them, but Norm Macdonald's the main one that gets the credit for it. And then you're talking about Police Chief Jesse Curry, I'm assuming.
Yep. And then Jim LaVille, who escorted Oswald to his death. They're all Freemasons. You can find it in their obituaries. LBJ was a Texas Freemason. So it makes perfect sense that organization could have been used for the cover-up. I still believe that right-wing extremists in the military and the mob were behind it. It was because of, radicalism. It was because of segregation. It was because of the Bay of Pigs, and Vietnam. But it also, if you look at the NASA angle, I think JFK, he gets credit for the space program, and he deserves it, I guess. But he was becoming a skeptic of the space program. It was more Johnson's baby than it was JFK, because it was dragging on. It was over budget, and he wanted to use it. JFK wanted to use it as a peacemaking effort and a joint mission with the Russians. And he also had a handpicked astronaut, Edward Dwight, a black man who was going to be on the moon. And this guy, Dr. Barry, the father of the doctor who sabotaged my career, I found a racist rant he made in an interview, awful stuff, talking about culling out the blacks from the space program and all this stuff, and standing up to JFK and RFK and refusing their order to put black people in the Apollo program. Anyway, Edward Dwight was supposed to go to the moon. 3 weeks after Kennedy was killed, he got pulled from the program.
It's crazy when you really look back. Like I know, again, I'm not like as much as I talk about the JFK thing, I'm not a conspiracy person. I'm just trying to look at like what doesn't make sense in certain things. And I'm sure when you're looking like Freemason stuff is talked about, it's popularized in some movies, and then some people talk about it on the internet. But I mean, it's just a fraternity, basically. I mean, they do go do like weird extent stuff. I had a researcher on here talk about the Bohemian Grove and like that whole Knights Templar Freemason thing. He's an academic. He's like, it's real, but all they do is like direct policy there. I'm like, they're directing policy in front of an owl statue. If that's what that is, you don't think that's a little bit weird? Like, you can get a cheap hotel room and it's like save you half the time, maybe a couple ticks too. So like, but he was just like, yeah, I don't think it's that weird. And I'm like, all right, but that's just how these functions go. I mean, for you, was it shocking realizing how many people might have been involved in the whole grand scheme of things? I mean, you mentioned your church as well too. That's got to suck because you're going to a place for comfort, a place that you know, and then you can't even go there because that's connected.
Right. My kids' first disclosure about being exploited in child pornography was to their youth group, a youth minister at Calvary Chapel in Gulf Breeze, Florida, who the church ended up trying to bully me to shut up about it and remain silent. And they didn't report it to anybody, which, was a felony. And they said, told me to submit to their spiritual authority and keep quiet about it. And we got that treatment in multiple churches. A Church of God in Georgia told me I should just burn all my records and forget about all this. Um, uh, yeah, and in regards to Freemasonry, I mean, I think the whole concept is weird, but I don't see this global Masonic conspiracy that some people see. You know, when I look at what I was dealing with, it's Dixie Mafia, Southern Freemasons, Albert Pike, Confederate general, their overlap with the Ku Klux Klan, um, and probably even some extreme hybrid version of that I was dealing with in Florida. Um, there's so many groups have spun off of Freemasonry, like the Ordo Templi Orientis, Aleister Crowley stuff. There's all kind of people who claim to be Freemasons. So I don't see a grandiose, global conspiracy here. I see Southern white Freemasons, Dixie Mafia type stuff. Is how I see it.
You got to think in a position like that, maybe you're invited to a special dinner, you rub elbows with somebody that might know someone in political power or something high up. Not even getting their number, but it starts to play something on your mind. And then also, if you're able to influence local law enforcement based on if you live in like a rural county or some state out there that you can bribe an officer $20 to not give you a speeding ticket, then you start feeling like you can do this more. And that's when it kind of expands out. But how did does your ex-wife still have a restraining order on you? And how did,
Oh
like,
no, they got dismissed after 3 months. Well, as soon as I could get a court hearing, which took 3 months, they had no case. She pretty much, admitted she was never afraid of me, that, there's no evidence I was stalking her. And so they had to dismiss the case. But they sped away from the courthouse, went and snatched my son again from his school, hid him for another 2 weeks. And that's when my son saw them dismantling this operation, hauling crates of guns and 55-gallon drums and digging up the backyard. Uh, that's probably when the murder occurred. Their grandmother trying to scrub blood off the carpet, then removing the carpet from the house. And all this I saw evidence of in February 5th of 2009. I went to the house. They were going to prove that none of this was true. And what I saw was proof that it was all true. The entire backyard was dug up. The carpet had been removed. The attic was all sealed up. There were deep ruts in the front yard where a trailer had been backed up to the backyard to haul stuff off. Obviously, something very dramatic had happened at that house. So they were dismantling their operations.
Now, what was the conclusion? Like, actually let me take it back. When the judge in your court case, I'm assuming you had more than just one, but was there any that was influenced in any of this at any time? I mean, obviously that's a main position to be influenced if you're talking about a decision.
Every effort I made to try to get a restraining order, even after I had death threats and so forth, and and over a dozen acts of stalking, um, got reassigned to Judge Thomas Centuri, whose wife was the regional representative for Congressman Jeff Miller. Congressman Jeff Miller is another ultra right winger and another Freemason. Uh, Santuri blocked every effort I made. He shielded Mike Nobles from double digit restraining order violations. He signed a court order returning firearms to him, knowing he was a felon. Right before we signed the court order to return firearms to a felon, uh, he signed an order changing my address to a non-existent address so I wouldn't get a copy of the order. That's just some of the things that Santuri did. In every case, it would be assigned to a judge, get reassigned to Santuri. He would make sure it goes away.
Did at any point they make you try and seem crazy? I know we talked about the health assessment aspect things, but did they go to further extents when it came to just doing everything they can to hospitalize you or do something where he needs to be? He's obviously not mentally there.
Yeah, Mike Nobles tried to have me Baker acted involuntarily, observation, and he failed at that. Uh, the Florida Department of Children and Families, after a psychologist made a report that required law enforcement, uh, demanded I get a psychological evaluation. I went and got an independent one from a psychiatrist and was completely fine. Ended up having 5 evaluations, including a full battery of tests, which I excelled in all of them. When they arrested me, they held me out without bond pending a psychological evaluation. I'd already had 2, and right after that, I had a full battery of psychological tests related to this craziness that was going on with my medical certification. As a pilot, again, I excelled in all of them. So yeah, that was the drumbeat. He's crazy. He's crazy. He's crazy. Crazy. Um, he's a crazy guy making false allegations, but really the allegations were coming from an army of mandatory reporters. I found records of 911 calls from within that house. No record with Mike Nobles as the suspect. The rest of the report's blank. We don't know who was being victimized, whether they're even still alive. Um, and then there's the erased foster kids. There's prior reports regarding his own kids that they made to go away. So, anyway.
When did you finally get your kids back after they kidnapped them? One of your sons or your
January
son?
of the kidnapped them, and then that's another weirdness. The kids were kidnapped on Halloween. You um, I get placed under false arrest on March 18th of 2010. That's the anniversary of the execution of Jack de Molay, the Knights Templar. Ended up getting a fake medical certificate labeling me defective, basically, from the FAA on October 13th of 2010. That's the anniversary of the order to round up the Knights Templar, Black Friday, Curse Day. So I had 2 important court hearings on April 20th on different years. That's the anniversary of the death of Pope Clement V, who was believed to have died from the Templar curse. So those may be coincidences, but it's very weird. So anyway, yeah, it was October 31st. I kidnapped the kids. I got them back late January of the following year. So three months.
Now, has your ex-wife reached out to you at all or talked to you about and like how much of what was going on do you really think it was just the stepfather or the your ex-father-in-law that was doing all of this and it really wasn't your
She she well, it wasn't just her. It was multiple. Obviously, his brother was involved, but my kids identified multiple other perpetrators involved. Um, uh, she ended up completely abandoning the kids for years and then resurfacing with this vague statement that, you know, she had basically abandoned her own kids for their own safety because some of what I said about her family was true. Uh, she's never gone into specific about what she believes was true and not true, uh, but she has made some vague acknowledgments about her family and abandoned her own kids to protect them, in her mind anyway. Uh, I haven't talked to her in years. I think my kids may talk to her, my grown kids, occasionally. Uh, According to my oldest son, the only comment he's made about her was that, you know, she just wants it all to go away, doesn't want to talk about it anymore. So,
When, like, did anybody reach out to you that was maybe involved in blocking or being a part of the kind of cover up or erasing or ruining your life? Did anybody bother to reach out and say like something a little bit more detailed to the story that you didn't know? Because I'm sure you're still, it's not something that's ever not going to be thought about. So you're going to be looking at it forever.
yeah, my attorney, the one who got cold feet and bailed on me, that it was set up with by Ed Fleming, Bush's former attorney. Right before she abruptly quit, she said, "You're dealing with a cult, and your life is in danger." So,
What do you do with that information, man? I mean, you're doing what any good parent would do, and you're fighting for your kids. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that just don't have the resources, or especially if every corner you're turning at, it's a dead end, and you're like, what do I do?
yeah, I had this woman who somebody at church set me up with her. Nancy Locke was her name. She worked with cadaver dogs and had some powerful connections at the FBI. In fact, I found a picture of her posing with Bob Mueller, the FBI director. She tried to help me. She got shut down. Uh, she asked for a bunch of information from me. I gave it to her. Um, she had that packet returned to me through a Santa Rosa County Sheriff's deputy, and it had a note attached to it. You know, she had this deputy holding onto this package with a note attached to it. It said, "Give to the FBI or State Attorney General if Mark Harris dies." Um, so I was a little rattled by that, and she cut off all ties to me. Said that she couldn't participate in this anymore because she had grandkids to worry about. So
I mean, I hate to say it, but I don't blame her for that. I mean, I
yeah,
don't, again, how deep you are with a lot of this stuff, I'm sure you got multiple death threats and people were
I did. Yeah,
probably, yeah.
and total strangers approached me and threatened me. You know, so
I know how you said earlier about the coincidences, like maybe they're just a coincidence as like jokingly, but like, hey man, if your mailman's a Freemason, you know, everyone in your neighborhood starts to be a Freemason, you know, maybe it's not a coincidence. Something else is going on there.
right.
When did you decide that you wanted to turn this into a book? I mean, like I said, it's not an easy topic to talk about. So media coverage, press coverage, things of this sort, sadly, they just don't handle well.
No, um, you know, I guess while this was going on, I had people like, you know, my kids' therapists and their school principals say, you know, you should write a book about this. You know, I was in the heat of battle at the time. Um, and then when I had every door slammed in my face with one government agency at the federal level after another slamming the door in my face, lying, stonewalling. Um, so this would be back in 2013. You know, I wanted to write a book, but I ended up just, you know, suffering such severe PTSD on my own that I had to just set it aside and go into survival mode for years. I'm remarried now, you know, wonderful wife. We've got two little kids now, my second marriage. It was probably about 3 years ago. You know, we're watching some Netflix shows, you know, and it's kids being abused and government cover-ups and, you know, foster children and so forth. And all the stuff came rushing back. You know, next thing you know, I'm out in my garage hauling in this mountain of thousands of pages of records. that are kind of scrambled by that point in time. Spend the next few months, these records piled on my dining room table, organizing them, and determined to finally, get my story out, to finally write my book. I hired a ghostwriter. She claimed anyway that her brakes went out and she suffered a concussion. And then she took the money that I'd sent her as a deposit and vanished and wouldn't talk to me anymore. Hired another ghostwriter who ended up handing my project off to one of his friends. That's Travis. Travis ended up getting killed in a single vehicle accident with no witnesses. I'm not saying he was murdered. I'm just saying that I was rattled by it, and I can't help but wonder, whether there may have been foul play. And anyway, I ended up, I've been pounding on doors for years. The press, anybody I can think of who might help me get my story out. One of the people I talked to along the way was David Denton. He does one of the JFK conferences. And I talked to Chris Milligan of Trine Day Press. Well, they ended up running into each other at some conference and talking, and my story came up. At that point in time, I'd hired this Travis Heerman to do the book, and the cost was exploding because of the complexity of the book, and it was a bigger job than he had anticipated. I was about to run out of money, and Chris called me up and says, we need to get this book done, and he took it over. So that was a miracle that the book got done because Chris took it over, paid for the rest of the ghost writing and the publishing and everything.
I know you had ghostwriters, but how hard was it for you to articulate just a direction of step one to the final step? Because obviously you have to think. I think it's like we have more than 12 chapters in your book. I've read about 8 of them so far, just in prep to have you on and everything. Still got a couple more to go, but there's not like an easy way to discuss what happened to you besides just laying it out on the table, but also where can I say this? Can I put this? Can I do this in a way that is going to not either freak out the reader or do something that's in a very professional kind of here it is?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was very difficult, when you get into the graphic details of the abuse, one big thing that, I struggle with was, there's some excerpts of my ex-wife's journals. I mean, that's very, very personal stuff. I didn't want to harm her or embarrass her. At the same time, it was an important part of the story because she's writing about crucifixion and burning and locked in a cage and trapped in a hole and infanticide, burying children in the woods. I felt like it was an important part of the story, and we agreed that it needed to be in there. Again, I struggle with that because it was, kind of an invasion of her privacy. At the same time, it was evidence. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of personal stuff that, a sealed arrest that I had back in '98. It was an embarrassing moment that's been exploited to try to discredit me. I had to lay all that out there, even though I'm entitled to say it never happened because I was never convicted of anything and it was sealed. But it's been dredged up, to try to cover their tracks with dirty laundry. So yeah, it was difficult. There's a lot of personal stuff regarding my ex-wife, regarding myself, regarding my kids that I had to lay out there. So wasn't easy. So
One really important question, probably the most important of all of it. How are your kids and you doing now? Obviously, this is not something that's easily forgettable.
no, it's not, and um, my 21-year-old, he doesn't remember much. He was only 4 at the time, uh, which may be best. I mean, he's dealt with the severe trauma of it and PTSD and anxiety. My oldest, he remembers it very well. Um, he just wants to forget about it, put it behind him. Uh, they were both supportive of me writing the book because it was important for me to process this, and part of the big trauma for me was having it all buried. You know, uh, you know, I've had to deal with the trauma inflicted to my kids for over a decade now with hundreds and hundreds of therapists and psychiatrist appointments and multiple hospitalizations and drugs and therapy and everything. While I had the government claiming nothing happened to my kids. Um, so, that was part of my trauma, was being silenced. This was a way to not be silenced anymore. Um, so,
Have you still felt that now with the book's release that it's being silenced in certain areas, besides maybe lack of media representation? I just don't see that. They bungled the Epstein stuff that they had. One major media doesn't even talk about it. So I can only expect.
yeah, I mean, I thought, for example, this bombshell discovery with this HR guy who was the program manager for equal opportunity at Delta Airlines was, you know, doing gruesome, horrific things to foster kids, forcing them into child pornography at gunpoint, sodomizing them, and so forth. You know, he was one of the key characters in sabotaging my career. I really would have thought that would be a bombshell that would get the press to cover this, but they still won't cover any aspect of it. And it boggles my mind that to me that's a big story. A sheriff's department handing over an arsenal of guns and ammo to a federal convict, you would think would be a big story. They wouldn't report that. When they kidnapped my kids, I had audio recordings of the explicit extortion demands. I tried to get the press to cover it in Destin, Florida. Not only did they not cover it, they tipped off the church leaders, and the church put on this dog and pony show called Civic Duty Day, where they had a city councilman, the mayor, a circuit judge, all there representing God in their positions, while they railed against child pornography and sexual abuse from the pulpit that day. Obviously, a smokescreen to cover for their deacon in charge of children, who was a child rapist. So no coverage, tip off the church. The church puts on this big show to cover for my devils. So the whole thing has been that way. And I had a number of times reporters interested. There was one in Florida, the Navarre Press in Florida. The reporter says there's a hell of a story here, but her publisher wouldn't let her publish it. And I got that everywhere I turned. You would think a private citizen, a pilot who's had this exemplary career in aviation, has his career sabotaged through fraud. He's ganged up on by this army of big shot Washington attorneys. Somebody might cover that. My hometown newspaper, we were back in Cleveland, Georgia at the time, wouldn't report the story. Their cover story that week was a new crosswalk in town. So
I guess when it came to good reviews, bad reviews, I mean, are you noticing like separate divides in audiences based on the content of the book, or are you showing it to just
there's
a
a
lot of
couple of
people?
people that I've received no feedback from, which I wonder what they thought of the book. Uh, all the feedback that I've got has been very positive. I find the book very credible. Um, I'd like to get more reviews. There's only a couple of reviews on Amazon. I know Sherry Seymour. I don't know if you know her. The octopus uh, murders, American conspiracy is
Oh, the documentary.
yeah. Um, she gave me a nice review, but um, yeah, I mean, I'd like, I want to get the story out there. I didn't write this for money. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with book contracts with a publisher, but the writer doesn't get much, and I don't anticipate making any money from this. I just want the story out. Um, I am working on I hired a guy a couple of days ago to do an audiobook. The ebook's out now. I talked the publisher into dropping the price on that to, it's now under $10. So again, my goal is to get the story out to as many people as possible. I want some sort of justice for my kids, accountability, for the kids who have been erased in the story, the foster kids who who've just been outright erased by the state of Florida. They were very real kids. Um, and I want to expose this formula that was used to fix cases. So, other parents don't fall into the same traps that I was, you know. Um,
I appreciate that what you have done in putting it into a book form for to be able to educate people or just raise awareness on the subject as well too. I mean, you might not consider yourself a whistleblower, but you definitely are. I've talked to plenty of them on here. And you never know in the moment until like afterwards you realize that what you're doing. And I appreciate everything that at least you've kind of went through and kind of came out with a more positive attitude on this. I know it's got to be a severely traumatic experience for you and your kids, but you're able to speak about it and educate people about it. That's not an easy thing to do, and it's not an easy subject that's even ever talked about in our culture. Well, just as people. Is there a place that people can find any of your links when it comes to social media profiles, Amazon, where they can get the book? And I'm going to push everyone, if you're listening to this now, to go and either get his book, but also leave a review as well too, because I think there needs to be a lot of awareness on this.
Thank you. Yeah, I have started a website. I want to get some more of the documents posted there. So I have this massive amount of documentation, um, kind of explaining some of the aspects of the story and some links. Um, you can see the kids' videotape testimony when they were forced to testify in the case against me, where they articulately testified to witnessing their grandfather commit murder. That's on there. I have their permission to air that. It's housesoftheholy.net. That's my website. Trimeday.com. It's the publisher's website. You can purchase the book there. It's also Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all the major book outlets. It's there. Again, the part about James Brimberry being an alleged fellow predator. That's not in the book. I didn't know about it at the time. There's a couple of other things. We're running out of time, but I just recently received a FOIA response. Took them 8 months to respond. This was regarding the sabotage of my medical certification as a pilot. Out of 15 very specific requests for records, they blatantly lied in at least 10 of those. So the government lies are continuing. But anyhow, housesoftheholy.net. Lost my train of thought. We're working on a revised version of the book. Hoping to get in the next 4 to 6 weeks an updated version that includes the part about Jim Brimberry, the ongoing cover up regarding my medical certification. Just a few details to update the book, but the audio book will be coming out as well.
Well, Mr. Harris, I'm going to make sure I link all your links in the description below for people to be able to click on and check out as well too. I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show about this, and I'll have you on again to keep me updated with the case as it kind of expands a little bit more. You're able to uncover more things as well. Appreciate the time, and thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.